Every house is built by someone, but the builder of all things is God. Now, Moses was faithful in all his house as a servant, as a testimony of those things which were to be spoken of later or spoken in the future. But Christ, and I don't know what's in your translation, but probably you have two words that are not in the original. You probably have something like, but Christ was faithful as a son over his house, whose house we are. Actually, those two words, was faithful, not there. So it really should read, but Christ as a son over his house, whose house we are, if we hold fast to our confidence and the boast of our hope firm until the end. Well, our question this morning is, why are we talking about Moses? Why are we talking about Moses? Or why is the writer to Hebrews talking about Moses? Now, this is going to begin a new section in this letter to a group of apparently Jewish believers. We have finished up chapters 1 and 2, which laid out the general framework. Jesus is the final revelation from God. There is nothing to add. Jesus is higher than angels. Yet Jesus took the form of a human. Not just the form, but he truly became one of us. And he knows our weaknesses. He knows our temptation. Probably an idea we struggle with, that Jesus was tempted just like we are. We might think, well, Jesus wasn't tempted like me because, well, I get tempted and do really foolish things. But Jesus was tempted. Tempted on a daily basis to avoid the cross, to take a shortcut, far more than we could ever imagine. Also discussed in chapter 2, the idea was that Jesus had a mission, not to be a great teacher, although he was, not to be a social worker, although he did often connect with and work with those who are socially marginalized, the outcast, in some way that nobody anticipated, in some way that often we overlook. The mission of Jesus was to come here and restore the position of mankind to what it was originally meant to be. He was sent to come here and bridge this problem, solve the problem of our sin separating us from God. And in so doing, in a way that I still try to figure out what in the world does this mean, we are going to end up in glory in a far more elevated position, and in fact inheriting as co-inheritors with Jesus, and in fact judging from a position of authority. We will end up in a far different kind of position of who we think we are than, well, who we think we are now. The people at that time were expecting maybe a great military leader, maybe a great king like Solomon who would make Israel great again and make everyone prosperous. If we're going to be honest, that's kind of a Jesus we would like to see. We want to be prosperous. We want to be safe. It's hard for us to imagine that's temporary. Jesus came for a far deeper reason, a far greater purpose, to restore us to our position before God the Father and to make us co-inheritors with him for all eternity. I struggle with that idea. Now, he's previously, whoever wrote this book, compared Jesus to angels. Most of us would think, well, obviously angels are greater than I am. Angels who are able to do mighty deeds. But the writer of Hebrews is connecting a very specific type of interaction of the angels with us. Angels who gave God's communication and the law to Moses. Angels being the intermediary, and it kind of made sense. Absolute holy God can't just interact with Moses. There had to be something in between sinful man and Moses. But even if you think of angels like that, the warrior angels that were made visible by Elijah the prophet to his servant, angels that released Paul from prison, angels that were seen at the tomb. Jesus is greater than any of those angels. We saw from chapter 2 that, of course, Jesus now has a position that no angel would ever get close to. Jesus sits at the right hand of the Father. Jesus is in control of all things. The future world will be controlled by Jesus, not by angels. Well, now in chapter 3, although these ideas are going to be revisited, the writer to Hebrews is now going to take a slightly different perspective and take up a slightly different subject. Who is Jesus greater than that you could imagine? Now, if we had to go around the room, who is your most impressive type of person that you've ever met or could even imagine? And I've met with some of you and talked to many over the years, and of course names like Billy Graham, perhaps a Bible teacher somewhere at some time. Oftentimes in a church like this, there's a minister from decades ago, and he was a very impressive person, and if only things could be like when he was here. Well, the writer to Hebrews is doing that. And if we think of a great person from the Bible, who would you think of? Now, there are many great people in the Bible, many exciting people in the Bible. Maybe one of the first ones you think that did mighty deeds, Samson. And we tend to look at the story of Samson, and I'm sure Sid has gone over this with you in the book of Judges. The problem with the book of Judges is it kind of compresses everything to a few verses, and there's a story of Samson. Let's see. He tied the tails of the foxes together and burned up the crops of the Philistines. You remember that? He apparently got locked in the city, and he tore out the city gate and walked away with it. And then he got tricked, and he was imprisoned, and he pushed down the stadium where they were all trying to have a great time making fun of Samson. Seemed like it just happened in a few years. How long did Samson reign? How long did he judge Israel? Well, that went on for 20 years. That's maybe something we miss. Samson judged Israel for 20 years. Was he always a superhero? Did he do other great deeds that we don't remember? We kind of focus on the end. We might think of Abraham. Now, for many of us, Abraham is considered to be the father of our faith. God chose him, brought him out of Ur of the Chaldees, said, I'm going to make a great nation of you. Well, Abraham's important, but we don't have a whole lot of information on Abraham doing any miracles or prophets. We remember the scene where Jesus is on the Mount of Transfiguration, and you remember the two great figures that he was talking to there. Elijah. Elijah was a great prophet. He did, and you might start to wonder, what did Elijah do? Well, let's see. He came into conflict with Ahab, and he declared that there would be a drought, and there was. And then he wasn't around for several years, a few short years, made himself known to Ahab again, and we have that huge contest, called down fire from heaven, and of course, none of the false people could do that. Ahab, of course, totally embarrassed. Not really. But Elijah called down fire from heaven. And then he ran away and said, I can't do this anymore. Really, it seems like just a few years. Well, who was the other person on the Transfiguration Mount with Jesus and Elijah. Oh, Moses. Now, Moses is a big figure. Those of you who are Gentile, we kind of get the big picture. Oh, Moses. Moses, the first 40 years, lived in the palace with Pharaoh. He was living the good life. And then what did he do? Well, he tried to take it all on himself, and he killed somebody, and word got out, and he ran away. And he stayed for how long in the desert watching sheep? 40 years. Now, I've gone through times in my life when I needed to rediscover who I was or kind of do something different, but 40 years? That's a long time. And finally, for whatever reason, he becomes concerned about his brethren in Egypt and, of course, comes back and leads them out of Egypt. But for those who are Jewish, oh, Moses is far bigger than that. And the writer to Hebrews, of course, wants us to make the comparison Moses and Jesus. Because if you've been listening, if you really want to understand Hebrews, make sure you read Exodus. Well, what are some comparisons between Jesus and Moses? Well, there are many. Think about it. Jesus did many signs and wonders. So did Moses. Jesus confronted the leaders of his day. Well, so did Moses. Moses rescued his people from death and bondage. Well, that's what Jesus did. Moses led his people to the promised land. Well, Jesus came to lead us to a new land. Moses, on many occasions, interceded for his people so that God would not judge them. Well, Jesus interceded for us so that God wouldn't judge us. Moses communicated with God face to face. You remember those stories? Moses would come down from the mountain and his face would be shining, reflecting the glory of God. Oh, God talked to Moses face to face. We get the idea that God talked to Jesus face to face. Jesus seemed to be very familiar with God the Father and addressed him as God the Father. Moses came up with a way to deal with our sins. Jesus came to deal with our sins. So if you were a person in this Jewish congregation who was hearing about Jesus, and remember there are very, very, we would call them observant Jews who have now converted to following Jesus. There were some who weren't quite sure. Sometimes they were pretty good, sometimes they weren't. And much like perhaps any church, there were some people who were just kind of showing up. That's who was reading this book. If you had any kind of a Jewish background, you're going to think, well, I know Jesus may be greater than angels. I know he may be greater than most people. But is he really greater than Moses? The one who brought us into the promised land, the one who gave us God's laws, the one who interceded for us, the one who protected us. That would be a very important question if you were Jewish. And the clear answer that we see this morning is yes. Whoever you can imagine as a spiritual giant, and we could go around the room and maybe look through your library and think about stories you've heard. Martin Luther, Spurgeon, R.C. Sproul. You come up with a name, Jesus is greater than that. And for the writer of Hebrews, to the people reading this letter, the most impressive, important, foundational person that they could think of was, well, Moses. Jesus is greater than Moses. Now at this point, let's make an uncomfortable comparison. I've been in churches where the main consideration was, yeah, but it is that affiliated with the Southern Baptist Convention. Whatever you do, whatever we did, had to be SBC. Sunday school material had to come from Lifeway. Vacation Bible School had to come from Lifeway. You want estate planning? You had to go through Southern Baptist in Fresno. You want to contribute to the missionaries? Well, you have to do that through Annie Armstrong or Lottie Moon. In other words, whatever you're doing, it has to be through the Southern Baptist. Southern Baptist greater than Jesus? Almost, wasn't it? Now let's look to the comparison that the writer makes next. Yes, Moses was faithful. Verse 2, he, that is Jesus, was faithful to him, that is God the Father, who appointed him, as Moses was in all his house. That his refers to God, not Moses. So Moses, yes, was faithful. The writer is saying, yes, I'll be honest, Moses is a very impressive figure. We might want to get the big picture of Moses. The writer of Hebrews is saying, I'm willing to consider the last 40 years when Moses was leading the people out of Egypt. Yes, Moses was faithful. Jesus was faithful. Verse 3, for he has been counted worthy of more glory than Moses. Whatever you think about Moses, and Moses was very impressive, let's make it clear, Jesus is greater than Moses. Let's make it very clear. Whatever you think about the Southern Baptist, whatever you think about using Southern Baptist agencies and conventions and individuals, Jesus is greater than all of that. Yes, Southern Baptist agencies can be very good. They can provide estate planning. Yes, they have missionaries. They do many good things. Disaster relief. Let's make it very clear. Southern Baptist Convention can do many good things. But Jesus is greater than all of that. Because the builder of the house has more glory and honor than who is serving in the house. Who's ever serving in the house needs to be bringing honor and glory to the builder and owner and ruler of the house, and not himself. Verse 4, for every house is built by someone, but the builder of all things is God. So yes, Moses is in the house. Moses is in the house. Now, I've talked to some people, even people in seminary, who think, well, somehow we're not concerned about the Old Testament, see? We're only concerned about what happened after Pentecost. Moses is in the house. He's serving in the house. He's faithful in the house. Now, don't get the wrong idea. He's not there because he was making sacrifices. He's not there because he was good enough. Moses is in the house because he was faithful in all his works and obedience as a testimony of these things which are going to happen in the future. These things which are going to happen in the future. Now, I don't have the complete explanation for it this morning. We don't have time. If Moses is in the house, it's not because Moses did exciting things. If Moses is in the house, it's not because he was obedient climbing up and down a mountain. If Moses is in the house, it's not because he happened to bring down the law. If Moses is in the house, and apparently he is, it's because he is faithful in the house as a servant of those things which are coming, not which were then. You don't get in the house by being good enough. You don't get in the house by being a faithful Jewish person who goes to temple and reads Torah and does sacrifice. Verse 5, if you're faithful in the house, it's because you are being obedient to, you are serving as a testimony to those things which are going to be happening later than Moses. Obviously, Jesus. Moses is in the house. But he's in the house because he is, in some way, a model of things to come. Now, this is perhaps complex. It's deep. Sid will tell you the plans that Moses was given for the tabernacle are based on far more deeper things than just tent pegs and animal skins. They are testifying to things in the future. They are testifying to heavenly things. They are testifying to the thing who rules in heaven now. Don't get confused. Yes, Moses was faithful to what he was given, but all of that pertains to the one who is to come. And we must be very careful. We distinguish between the builder and the servant. Don't mistake the servant, Moses, for the one who owns the house. Jesus is the builder of the house. Jesus is the one who rules the house. Moses is just considered faithful if he brings honor and glory to the one who owns the house. A testimony of those things which are to come. Verse 6, but Christ was faithful as a son over his house, whose house we are. Now remember, those two words are perhaps, if it's a verb, one word, but Jesus as a son over his house. Same house. Not in the past tense. It's not something that's done. Oh, he was faithful over his house. Jesus is always faithful. Jesus was faithful before he came into this world. Jesus was faithful in this world. Jesus is faithful now. He is over the house now. This is his house. And notice, the son over his house. This is his house. If you're going to be anyone impressive, like Moses, you need to be bringing honor and glory to the one who owns the house. So again, we go back to whoever you might have thought about, or even the Southern Baptist Convention. Whatever you're doing, Annie Armstrong, Lottie Moon, disaster relief, missionary support work, whatever. That's not the house. That needs to be bringing honor and glory to the one who owns the house, the one who rules the house. In other words, whatever we're doing here can't be the end all, can't be all of that we're about. I've been in churches. I've taken my children to a church because they had a fabulous youth program. They had illustrated sermons. They do very famous Christmas and Easter programs where they have live animals up on a stage. You can be known for that, but you should be known for that because you are bringing honor and glory to Jesus. If whatever you're doing, feeding the homeless, registering voters, taking care of people's estate, helping the widows and the orphans, if that is the end in and of itself, you're missing it. Whatever you're doing needs to be bringing honor and glory to the one who owns the house. And then some very uncomfortable words. Whose house we are. We're in the same house with Moses. We're in the same house that Jesus rules and owns and is the master of. You can't be in your own house. You need to be in his house. You could do great things, but you're not in his house. Isn't that kind of a strange idea? You're in the same house with Moses. If you are faithful like Moses is faithful, it's in the same house. Listen, there's only one house with God. There's only one house. Either you're in that house or you're not. Moses wasn't in a separate house doing his sacrifices. He was faithful to that which was to come. If you're going to be in God's house, you're in that same one house that Jesus rules over. And then a very uncomfortable word. If you could be in the house, maybe you're in the house. Many of the commentators I read this week make a big distinction as to what kind of a word this if really is. Many times in the original language you can say if, but what you really mean is, of course, I know this is not true. Sometimes in the original language you can say if, but what you really mean is, well, of course this is true. This if means maybe yes, maybe no. This depends. What does it depend upon? If you hold fast to your confidence. What is your confidence? Chapter 2, why Jesus came here. That he is our eternal payment for sin. You can't do it on your own. And now he's glorified and higher than any angel and sits at the right hand of the Father. If you have that confidence, and if the boast of your hope is in Jesus and what Jesus did and what he's doing now, well, then you're in the house. So why are we talking about Moses? Well, because Moses was in the house. He was faithful. He was doing the job God gave him to do. He was doing the job God gave him to do even when the people didn't want him to do that job. He was faithful doing the job that God gave him to do when the people said, enough with you, we want to go back to Egypt. He was faithful to do the job that God gave him to do when they kept coming to him and complaining. We're tired of manna. You're trying to just make us die of thirst. We're tired of manna. We need meat. Oh, this is the promised land that God has given us. It's full of giants. We're going to be slaughtered. The Moses who came down from the mountain and discovered they'd made an idol. And he still went back up and interceded for them and prayed that the Lord would forgive them. That Moses. He's in the house. Faithful. But he doesn't own the house. And the question is, are you in the house? Well, our answers to some of our questions this morning is, how was Moses a model for Jesus? And the writer to Hebrews wants you to be very clear about that. Moses came and delivered his people from slavery and death. If you don't realize that you're in a land where the one who rules over it wants to just keep you in slavery and death, you might not have been delivered. If you don't realize that Jesus wants to lead you to a better place, a better land, you will reign with him forever. You might not be in the house. If you don't realize that even now Jesus is interceding for us, he is covering for our sins so that we can stand before God's throne blameless, you might not be in the house. You need to carefully think about this. The same house where Moses is. The same house where anybody who is faithful will be. The same house we can be in if we hold fast to this truth. Sometimes we are very confused about who is in the house. I've been in many churches where we think people are in the house because they give enough money. People who give enough money are somehow on all the committees. We don't want to upset them. We don't confront them. We need to be very clear. It's not about money. I've been in churches where they're very, very accepting. If you've come here every week, you come here on Wednesdays. Oh, they're always here. They must be one of us. They must be in the house. It doesn't matter how often you come to church. That's not what makes you in the house. Maybe if you do enough good works, they're good people. They really are good people. There are many good people in church.